Hi, my name is Lexus Nader, and today is April 26, 2016, and today I'm going to be presenting to you my very first podcast. The topic that I'm going to be talking about today is the controversy over whether or not a child is going to be affected if they're raised in a homosexual family structure or a heterosexual family structure. Nowadays, this is a big thing I feel like people are talking about, so that's why I chose to talk about it, because of the fact that the legalization of gay marriage has become a thing nowadays. Before we get started, we have to start talking about the background information that's important. An increasing number of children in the United States are being raised in gay and lesbian households, as we know it today. The 2000 U.S. Census included information on 600,000 same-gender unmarried couples, and of these households, 22% of gay couples and 34% of lesbian couples reported being involved in parenting. However, if you think about it, this is probably underestimated because of the fact that it's probably realistically a higher percentage because of the fact that this is only including parenting, like instead of just a single gay or a single lesbian trying to parent a child. Now that we have this basic understanding of how much gay and lesbian marriage and parenting is becoming effective in the United States, we have to start asking ourselves, what are the psychological effects on children that are going to be raised in homosexual households? Are there going to be traumatic differences between heterosexual and homosexual? Are they going to be minor or big, positive or negative, bad or good? All things that we have to take into consideration. Before I started my research and deciphering what the effects were really going to be like, I immediately assumed the obvious of what I thought was right. Before researching, I thought that since I was never really around my friends I never really had friends that had homosexual parents. It was always one mom, one dad, so I figured that was probably just the normal thing for it to be when I was a kid. But now that I'm older and more educated, I realize that I guess I just wasn't curious enough to figure out if there were more people in my time that had parents that were homosexual and if those people were affected by it. So I guess I was just very curious about this, and that's why I chose to write this about my podcast. While researching, I have found that studies indicate that few differences do exist between heterosexual and homosexual. What this is saying is that being in a homosexual family and raising a kid is not that much different from being in a heterosexual family and raising a kid. The psychosocial development of children in gay and lesbian families is similar to that of children in heterosexual families, as I said before. There are many different factors that can influence a child's ability to grow up properly, but like I said before, homosexual families are not a cause of that. However, being raised in a homosexual household is proven to surprisingly not be a factor that affects kids in childhood in any way. I have collected my research article from 3 separate articles that all have the same idea of saying that there's really big no difference between homosexual and heterosexual and how they affect the children. The first article that I researched from was called Introductions, Lesbian and Gay Parenting and Their Children by A.E. Goldberg. The second article that I gained research from was titled Children of Lesbian and Gay Parents by C.J. Peterson. And the third article that I researched was titled that was just as useful as the other 2, all equally as useful, was titled Sexual Identity Development of Children Raised by Gay and Lesbian Parents. The first article that I found useful to provide sufficient information was mainly because of the fact that this one was talking about the direct relationship between the child and the parents. It was talking about how the bond is actually stronger in some cases with homosexual parents. In relation to parenting, some studies have found that co-mothers are more actively involved in parenting than many fathers in heterosexual families. So this is basically saying that having 2 moms is going to create a bigger bond than having 1 mom and 1 dad. In gay and lesbian families, we can predict positive development when parents enjoy playing with their children, set appropriate limits, and explain rules very well as also. What this is basically saying is that with having either 2 moms or 2 dads, the rules in the house are going to be more reasonable for the child, and there's not going to be things like strict rules or strict curfews, strict chores, because they're going to try and really connect with the child as best as they possibly can. It is especially important to remember that the same processes are important to the psychosocial development of all children, no matter what their family structure may be in the end, versus heterosexual or homosexual. This research that occurred in this article also states that children raised by gay or lesbian parents do as well as children in terms of well-being, adjustment, functioning, and peer pressure relationships, and researchers have found that no differences in terms of bad things such as depression, anxiety, and self-esteem happen as well. So what this is basically saying is that the good things that come out of a bond between the parent and child and the bad things that come out of the bond between the parent and child are just the same in between heterosexual and homosexual. More research on lesbian parents than gay parents exists, showing that children raised by lesbian parents show higher levels of social, academic, and overall competence and have had fewer behavioral problems and less aggression than their peers. I guess this kind of goes with the fact that people always say that kids can easily create a bond with moms because they're more sentimental, not as aggressive as dads are. So with having co-mothers, this is why the bond is that much stronger. Research has shown that the sexual orientation of a child's parent does not affect their development, but that the quality of the parent and child's quality of the parent relationship is what really shapes the mental health. So this is saying that the actual bond is what shapes the mental health, not the fact that they have either two moms or two dads. LGBT parents provide an equally supportive and healthy environment for their children as heterosexual parents do. Children of the same-sex parents do not show any differences in development of gender identity or gender role behavior as well, based on the sexual orientation of their parents. In a study published in the Journal of Human Reproduction, researchers examined the development and well-being of children who are born to lesbian couples that use donor insemination to have their child. These children reported no significant differences between when being compared to children raised by heterosexual parents when it comes to preference of things like games or toys. So this is basically saying that the kids are not going to be preferred to go one way or the other when liking girls or boys just based on the fact that their moms are either gay or lesbian, that there is no effect based on their gender role identity and behavior. The second article that dealt with this controversy talks mainly about how children may be affected by peers and how the children who has the homosexual parents are going to be affected by their other peers at school or kids just around the block. This is because of the fact that some kids are pretty quick to judge when they hear that a kid has either two mommies or two daddies rather than the normal structure of just having one mom and one dad. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, also known as the AACAP, was a big part of the research in this article as well. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry believes that while children of LGBT parents are just as well adjusted as children with heterosexual parents, they can face some challenges. Children raised by LGBT couples may face discrimination in their respective communities or by the subject of childish taunting. So this is saying that kids are cruel during early childhood development, and like I said before, they may be quick to judge and start being mean to the kids based on their parents, which is not okay whatsoever. The AACAP suggests for LGBT parents to help their kids as soon as possible. They suggest that the parents should do whatever it takes before this gets too out of hand, causing the kids to get harmed. For example, they might just do simple things like talking to them or just being there for them and being as open as possible with them when they have questions for them. But more specifically, they can do one of 6 things. Number 1, prepare your child to handle questions and comments about their background or family. Number 2, allow for open communication and discussions that are appropriate to your child's age and level of maturity. Number 3, help your child come up with and practice appropriate responses to teasing or mean remarks. What this is saying is the parents should be able to teach their kids to be mature enough when being bullied, but they don't want their kids to act upon the bullying as well. They want them to be mature enough to come up with a good response and to just simply block it out of them. Number 4, using books, websites, and movies that show children in LGBT families so the kids can get a more familiar look with how that is. Number 5, consider having a support network for your child. For example, having your child meet other children with gay parents so they can talk to other children about how maybe they deal with the bullying, so the kids can have a more one-on-one with the other kids rather than just talking to the parents about it, the situation. Number 6, consider living in a community where diversity is more accepted. This clearly is the most extreme version of it, and if it gets too out of hand, the parents should be willing to do whatever it takes to make sure their child feels safe at all times and not trying to be bullied at all times. So that is probably the worst case scenario, is just to move on with your life and start new, just so the kid doesn't keep getting bullied. The third article that I based my research off of was an article that examined the personal and social development of children with gay and lesbian parents. This is basically the third article that is summing up the first and second article and just saying how there are no major differences between homosexual and heterosexual parents. This article reviewed studies on sexual identity, personal growth, and social relationships, behavioral problems, moral judgment, adjusting to school, intelligence, and drug and alcohol use were compared between children of LGBT parents and those with heterosexual parents. All studies come to the conclusion that there is no significant difference in the cognitive and behavioral development of children raised by homosexual parents. I think a good way to end this podcast up is by looking at the statistics again in a different way, just to see how the increase in homosexual parents is becoming a new thing. Studies estimate that between 1 and 9 million children in the United States have at least one parent who is lesbian or gay. As you can see, 1 in 9 million, you're probably thinking, so what, that's such a small number, but this is going to be increasing, and this is something that everybody is going to have to get used to, the fact that there's no real difference between the childhood development. There are approximately 594,000 same-sex partner households according to the 2000 census, and there are children living in approximately 27% of those households. With this being said, I think that we can come to the conclusion, as I've said previous times before, that based on these 3 different article researches, that there is no real difference between a homosexual and heterosexual, and that kids, unfortunately, will not be treated the same in most cases between their peers, but the actual relationship between the kid and the parents will remain the same, and the actual childhood development will remain the same between homosexual and heterosexual parents. Thank you.